What if the greatest tragedy of the Horus Heresy had never come to pass? What if Angron, the Red Angel, had never been broken by the butcher's nails? What if his rage had been tempered by clarity, discipline, and loyalty? The galaxy we know, torn apart by betrayal, fire, and endless war, could have been different. Systems that fell to chaos might have stood strong. Legions that fractured could have remained united. The Emperor himself might have faced Horus not with desperation, but with the full power of his loyal sons at his side. Imagine the World Eaters not as a legion consumed by bloodlust, but as warriors of principle, strength, and unyielding purpose. Imagine a galaxy where the heresy still happened, but the tide of rebellion was held at bay by one unbroken Primarch. Join us as we explore this alternate history. Witness what could have been and decide for yourself. How would the Imperium have survived if Angron had never been nailed? Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a deep dive into the dark, thrilling universe of Warhammer 40k. Hit the notification bell and prepare yourself, because the story you're about to see will challenge everything you thought you knew about the Horus Heresy. The galaxy had already begun to tremble under the weight of ambition and betrayal. The Great Crusade, humanity's bold expansion into the stars, had united countless worlds under the Emperor's vision. Yet the seeds of discord had been sown, subtle but persistent, and the fates of men and Primarchs alike were poised to shift the course of history. Angron's fate had been different. He had grown into a warrior of incomparable skill and discipline, his legion tempered not by rage alone, but by judgment and clarity. The butcher's nails, which in another timeline had driven him into madness, had never claimed him. The Red Angel stood as a figure of loyalty, a fulcrum of strength that the galaxy had never seen before. As whispers of rebellion began to stir, as Horus plotted in shadow, and as systems braced for the inevitable conflict, one truth remained. The presence of an unbroken Angron would change everything. Every battle, every choice, every allegiance would be touched by his clarity. The heresy, though it would still come, would not unfold as history had once recorded. And so the stage was set. The galaxy waited for heroes, for monsters, and for one Primarch whose discipline and loyalty might have been the difference between the Imperium's survival or its annihilation. In the outer rim of the Imperium, among the countless star systems that had yet to know the guiding hand of the Emperor, there lay the world of Nuceria, a planet of endless dust, endless blood, and endless chains. Its skies were often stained red with the glow of dying suns, the air heavy with ash and the scent of iron. Here, in the ash-choked arenas of its great cities, men and women fought not for freedom, but for the amusement of the privileged. Here, humanity was measured by the cruelty one could endure, and by the skill with which one could kill. And into this crucible of suffering arrived a being who was no ordinary child, a child of destiny, cast into a pit of slaves. Angron was not born to chains, yet he knew only their embrace from the moment of his landing on Nuceria. He awoke as all his brothers would awaken, yet his eyes were different, burning not with fear, but with an instinct that whispered of defiance, of the need to survive not only the world, but the masters who ruled it. He was a giant among infants, a boy who grew faster than his peers, strong in ways that were impossible for a human child, yet still bound by the cruel laws of flesh and mortality. The rulers of Nuceria were men and women without mercy. They saw Angron not as a child, but as an asset, a tool, a beast to mold and shape.
He was placed into the gladiatorial arenas almost immediately, though too young to lift the weapons of war. He learned quickly. The clatter of blades, the stench of blood, the agonized screams of the defeated became his tutors. Pain became his language, suffering his grammar. Yet within him there remained a spark untouched by the cruelty around him, a sense of self, a sense of justice, and above all, a sense of loyalty to those who suffered alongside him. Angron's earliest companions were other children taken from their homes, from their families, ripped from lives of ordinary hardship, only to be thrust into extraordinary torment. Together, they learned to survive, to trust one another, and to rely upon one another as shields against the omnipresent cruelty of their captors. In the eyes of his peers, Angron was more than a leader. He was a promise that survival, and perhaps even freedom, was possible, even if it was a dream whispered through the smoke of the arenas. As Angron grew, the rulers of Nuceria recognized the potential of their charge, and with it, their own cruelty intensified. They did not merely seek to train him, they sought to reshape him, to bend his mind as easily as they bent his body. Into the boy's skull were driven the infamous butcher's nails, devices of cybernetic horror designed to instill obedience, amplify aggression, and erase compassion. Yet in this version of history, where fate twists on the edge of a knife, the Emperor intervened before the nails could fully take hold, leaving Angron free of their influence. The instruments of torment were never driven home, and though the threat of them loomed like a shadow over the boy's life, he remained, in essence, untouched by their psychotic grasp. Even so, life on Nuceria was no kinder for their absence. The arenas demanded brutality. Angron fought every day, wielding crude blades and strange weapons, his strength unparalleled. Unlike others, he did not kill for pleasure or survival alone. He fought with the eyes of a strategist, the mind of a warrior. He observed patterns in his opponents, predicted their movements, and discovered within himself a combination of cunning and instinct that marked him apart from his fellow gladiators. This was not yet the Red Angel the galaxy would come to know, but the seed of a legend, a being forged in cruelty, yet tempered with clarity of thought and heart. As the years passed, Angron became not only a champion of the arena, but a beacon of hope among the enslaved. He would rally groups of children and adults alike, teaching them subtle techniques of survival, ways to outthink their masters, to endure, and to resist. He would whisper to them of freedom, though no one dared to imagine it could exist beyond the walls of Nuceria. To Angron, freedom was not yet a tangible goal, but a vision, a fire that burned in his chest with every swing of a blade, with every scream that echoed through the Colosseum. Yet even as he trained, as he fought, as he protected those weaker than himself, he felt the gnawing weight of destiny. In the night, when the arenas were silent and the masters drunk on the blood of their victims, Angron would stare at the stars and feel a pull he could not name, a sense that he was part of something far greater than Nuceria, something that stretched across the galaxy itself. It was a whisper, faint as a shadow, but persistent, and though he could not yet comprehend it, it was the voice of his father, the Emperor, calling across the void of space, reaching toward the sun he had cast into suffering. The seeds of rebellion had begun to root. Angron's skill and leadership made him not only a gladiator, but a figure of power, subtle and quiet among the enslaved. They began to trust him with plans, with small acts of defiance, with hopes they would not dare speak aloud. They trusted him because he did not seek glory. He sought justice. He did not seek power. He sought survival. In these formative years, the boy who would one day terrify the galaxy learned the first lessons of command, of loyalty, and of courage. Yet the shadow of Nuceriate cruelty was ever present. Their masters continued to push, to test, to torment. Battles were arranged not only for spectacle, but for fear, designed to break the mind as much as the body. Angron's victories in the arena were met with not praise, but with increased demands, more brutal opponents, more perilous circumstances. The boy learned that freedom was not given, it was taken. And the galaxy, vast and indifferent, was a place where chains might be eternal. And yet, for all the cruelty, Angron did not despair. Even in the face of impossible odds, he would stand unbroken, guiding others, protecting those who could not protect themselves, carving out a fragile oasis of hope in a world otherwise consumed by blood. It was in these quiet, hidden moments that the essence of Angron truly formed, a warrior whose rage had not yet been twisted, a leader whose heart had remained intact, a son who had not yet known the betrayal that would mark his fate.
The arenas of Nuceria had shaped him, but they had not destroyed him. They had tested him, and he had endured. And somewhere beyond the swirling red dust and ash-choked skies, the stars waited, and destiny waited with them.
The rebellion began not with a battle cry, but with a whisper. Angron had long learned that hope was a fragile thing, a flicker easily extinguished under the gaze of the Nucerian masters. Yet in the shadows of the arena, among the huddled masses of children, women, and men who had been stripped of names and dignity, he spoke softly. He taught them to move silently, to watch and anticipate, to strike where cruelty was weakest. Each day, as the masters unleashed their games, Angron observed patterns, weaknesses, and the ever-shifting hierarchy of power within the arenas. The enslaved listened. They were desperate, yes, but they were also intelligent and capable. Discarded pieces of a society that had no use for them beyond entertainment. They began to trust Angron, not because he was strong, though he was stronger than any of them, but because he made them feel, for the first time in their lives, that they were not completely helpless. A small victory in the corners of the arena, a minor escape from punishment, a quietly subverted order became symbols of hope. And hope, fragile though it was, began to grow into something larger. Angron's leadership was not born of arrogance. He did not claim authority with words alone. He claimed it with action. When a fellow gladiator stumbled in the pit, facing a weapon too large and cruel for a single person to wield, Angron would intervene. He did not fight for himself. He fought for others. His body became a shield, his mind a strategy, and his heart a rallying point. Slowly, silently, the slaves began to recognize not only his skill, but his will, and they followed him. Yet the masters of Nuceria were not blind. They noted Angron's influence, the quiet obedience of the others, the way fights seemed to turn subtly in his favor. Each victory, each survival was noted not as skill, but as defiance, and so they sought to break him, to bend his spirit in the way they had done to countless others. Challenges became deadlier, punishments more inventive, and the whispers of rebellion were met with sharpened blades and cruel, cruel games. The arenas became a theater of suffering, and yet within this theater, Angron thrived. He learned to read the minds and hearts of his enemies almost instinctively. Where they struck, he would anticipate. Where they hesitated, he would exploit. Every step became a lesson in survival and strategy.
But while his body honed itself to the perfection of a gladiator, his mind began to craft something far more dangerous. A plan, a vision, a future where chains would break. The thought of rebellion was no longer abstract. It became a tangible path, mapped and measured, though he still did not yet know the reach of fate that hovered above him. The bonds Angron forged with his fellow slaves were deep and unshakable. Names became sacred in whispered conversations, identities reclaimed in secret rituals away from the eyes of the masters. He taught them to speak softly, to listen, to trust. He reminded them of the small victories, the unseen successes, because he knew that morale, more than weapons, could change the outcome of a struggle. Together they began to practice the movements of coordinated attacks, using the arenas themselves as simulators for rebellion. The captors could not have imagined the silent storm growing in the heart of their greatest champion. Years passed in this manner. Angron matured into a figure both feared and revered. In the arenas, he was unstoppable, a force of raw power tempered by cunning. Among the enslaved, he was a prophet of freedom, a leader who taught them not just to survive, but to fight with purpose. Each time a fellow gladiator fell, each time a comrade was tortured, he learned, adapted, and grew stronger, not through hatred, but through determination to shield those who could not protect themselves. He was shaping a culture of resistance in miniature, preparing for a day when the constraints of the arenas could no longer contain them. The rebellion itself began a series of small, almost imperceptible acts. Tools were hidden, minor weapons stolen, guards misled, small fires set. The masters dismissed these incidents as coincidences or the result of drunken cruelty. But Angron saw each minor victory as a proof of concept, a way to teach the others the mechanics of strategy. When the first major coordinated escape attempt was planned, it was executed with a precision that stunned even him. Those who had never held power moved as one under his guidance. Those who had never survived a single day outside of punishment now believed in the possibility of survival. Angron's vision of rebellion, however, was tempered by pragmatism. He knew the limits of his forces, the limitations of the environment, and the inevitability of the master's reprisal. The strategy was never reckless, never flamboyant. Every action had purpose, every movement a potential for survival or failure. The arenas had forged him into a leader who understood risk and reward, and he conveyed that to his followers. The people trusted him because they knew that every decision was calculated, deliberate, and necessary. Despite the growing tension and risk, Angron's personality remained intact, untainted by the butcher's nails, which had not been implanted in this alternate timeline. He was fierce, yes, but not mindlessly so. His rage was directed not at the universe, but at injustice. His strength was not driven by compulsive fury, but by the moral clarity that had been denied to him by circumstance. He understood loyalty. He understood love. He understood sacrifice. It was this humanity, preserved in a galaxy that would come to know him as a monster, that allowed him to inspire those around him. And then came the day that would forever alter the course of his life, though not in the way the universe had originally intended. From the heavens above the dusty horizon of Nuceria came a light unlike any he had ever known. It was not the fire of the sun, nor the glow of the arena's torches, but a radiant, purposeful presence. The Emperor had arrived. The Father who had cast his sons across the stars now appearing before him. But unlike the other Primarchs, who were greeted with honor and awe, Angron was still bound to the soil of his world, still responsible for those who had become like brothers and sisters to him. His first instinct was not to kneel or praise, but to protect. He would not abandon his comrades. He would not allow another generation to die in chains, even if it meant defying the being whom the galaxy would call God. This was the divergence point, the moment when fate itself paused. In the original timeline, the butcher's nails would have amplified his fury, twisting defiance into hatred, and the Emperor's intervention would have been perceived as betrayal. But in this reality, where the nails were never driven into his skull, Angron's mind remained clear, his decisions deliberate. He recognized the power of the figure descending from the sky, understood the potential for salvation, and yet weighed it against the responsibility to those who had come to trust him. He could choose freedom for himself or loyalty to the people he had sworn to protect. And that choice, made with a mind unclouded by agony, would shape the future of a galaxy. The Emperor's ship descended with calculated grace, its hull glinting in the fading red light of Nuceria's suns. Those who saw it thought it a miracle. Angron thought of it as an opportunity, not for power, but for action. And as the shadows of his captors lengthened across the dusty arenas, he made the decision that would define his life. He would not abandon the enslaved. He would not flee alone. And in that resolve, he became not just a gladiator or a leader, but a symbol of a different future. A future where the Red Angel remained unbroken, a force of hope and strategy, not of rage. And so, as the first stars appeared in the crimson sky, the stage was set. Nuceria would not fall quietly. It would be the crucible for a Primarch who would lead not through fury, but through clarity, courage, and loyalty. And somewhere in the distance, the faint pull of destiny reached out, preparing to guide the steps of a being who had survived chains, blood, and death. A being who was yet to learn the full measure of the universe waiting for him.
The horizon of Nuceria had never been so still. Even the winds that carried the endless red dust seemed to pause, as though the planet itself had sensed the presence descending from the stars. Above the sprawling arenas, above the crumbling cities where the enslaved had long been forced to endure, a ship unlike any seen before pierced the sky. It was no mere vessel of war, no mechanized destroyer, but a monument to purpose, an object of impossible scale and impossible light. Its hull shimmered with a gold that seemed almost alive, reflecting the dying suns as though the heavens themselves bowed to it. Angron's eyes, trained to notice every movement, every shadow, every threat, narrowed. He did not raise his gaze in awe, nor did he cower as so many others might have. This was a being of immense power, yes, but power alone did not command loyalty. He felt its presence, not in fear, but in calculation. He turned to those gathered with him, the enslaved, the warriors, the children who had survived by his guidance, and he saw the same mixture of wonder, hope, and confusion reflected in their eyes. They looked to him for understanding, for direction, and he did not fail them. The masters of Nuceria, however, did not understand what they faced. They sent a contingent of their elite enforcers to intercept the descending ship, confident that no force could defy the hierarchy of their cruel world. Yet when the first warriors attempted to ascend the ship's landing platform, they were met not with bullets or fire, but with a psychic force that swept over the battlefield like a tidal wave. Guards and overseers alike fell to their knees, their minds overwhelmed by visions of unity, purpose, and destiny. The enslaved, though terrified, were untouched. They looked to Angron, and in him they saw a calm born of clarity, a mind not manipulated by fear.
From the vessel descended the figure of the Emperor himself, tall, radiant, and impossibly commanding. His armor gleamed with a light that seemed to bend the shadows around him, and in his eyes was the weight of centuries, the wisdom of worlds, and the undeniable presence of authority. He did not raise his hands in threat. He did not demand obedience. He merely looked, and the air itself seemed to shiver. Angron, the Emperor's voice resonated across the arenas, not as a sound, but as a vibration that penetrated the hearts and minds of all who heard it. I am your father. I have come to bring you home, to lead your legion, to shape the galaxy as it must be. Angron's jaw tightened. He had heard promises before, from masters, from tyrants, from those who called themselves gods. Yet this presence, vast though it was, did not strike him as a god commanding blind servitude. Instead, it demanded consideration, judgment, understanding. He looked at the slaves around him, at the children who had become like brothers and sisters, at the companions who had trusted him to lead them, and he understood that to accept this figure's offer meant abandoning them. And Angron, unbroken in mind and spirit, would not do so. I will not leave, he said, his voice carrying across the arenas. Not without them, not while they remain in chains. A silence followed, not of fear, but of reckoning. The Emperor regarded him with an expression that seemed almost inscrutable, as though he understood every thought, every fear, every thought that Angron had made. And for the first time, Angron felt a measure of equality, a sense that he was not being judged for weakness, but being acknowledged for his will, for the clarity of his mind. The Emperor stepped closer, and the psychic presence that had already swept through the battlefield intensified, wrapping around him like a cloak. You are strong, the Emperor said, stronger than I expected, stronger than any who have come before. But strength alone is not enough. You must follow me. You must take your place among your brothers, for the galaxy needs you. Angron shook his head. He would not abandon the people who had come to rely on him. He would not allow their deaths to become collateral for some larger design, no matter how noble. I will not leave, he said. I cannot leave them to die. The Emperor's expression softened almost imperceptibly, and in that moment, Angron realized something he had not expected. He was being offered a choice. In the original timeline, the nails had already begun to twist his perception, turning loyalty into rage, obedience into hatred. But here, without them, his mind was free and his will was intact. He could choose, and he would choose wisely. And so the first seeds of a new path were sown. The Emperor did not force him. He did not abduct him. Instead, he waited, giving Angron the time to weigh the lives of the enslaved against the chance to ascend to something far greater. And in that waiting, a bond of trust, respect, and recognition began to form, one that would shape not only Angron, but the fate of the 12th Legion, and indeed, the galaxy itself. The tension in the arenas grew, but Angron's leadership never wavered. He had trained these people to survive, to resist, and now they would act under his guidance with a precision and unity that would shock the Nucerian masters. This was the moment when rebellion became real, when hope became action, and when Angron, the unbroken, proved that the Red Angel could lead not through rage, but through strategy, courage, and loyalty.
The dust of Nuceria had barely settled when Angron made his decision. He would not abandon those who had come to trust him, but he would follow the path the Emperor offered. Not as a slave, not as a pawn, but as a son with agency, clarity, and vision. And so, for the first time, the enslaved of Nuceria were not merely survivors of cruelty. They became instruments of freedom.
guided by a mind unclouded by rage or pain. The Emperor's ship descended into the arena with a precision that seemed preordained. The ramp extended, and the prisoners, led by Angron, stepped forward with cautious hope. Their gaunt faces, hardened by years of torture, betrayed a mixture of fear and anticipation. Angron walked among them, his massive frame a shield and reassurance, his eyes scanning for threats, and for the first time, his followers saw not only a fighter, but a strategist. He was a living symbol that survival could lead to purpose, that clarity could triumph over despair. The Emperor regarded the gathered slaves with something like recognition, though his focus remained on Angron. "You will not be taken against your will," he said, his voice carrying across the arena, ringing in the hearts of all who listened. "Those who have fought by your side will come with you if you deem it necessary. Your choices are your own." Angron's mind raced. He weighed the lives of the enslaved against the opportunity the Emperor presented. Here lay a chance to elevate them, to teach them to wield strength not merely for survival, but for justice, for order, and for a galaxy that had ignored them. He could guide them, train them, and ensure that the horrors of Nuceria would never define them again. With a firm nod, he made the decision that would change history. "They come with me, every one of them. We leave together." And so, the first seeds of the 12th Legion, the World Eaters, were sown under a different hand than the one history had recorded. Angron did not strike out in fury. He did not destroy in mindless rage. Instead, he began the painstaking work of transforming slaves and gladiators into soldiers capable of unity, strategy, and discipline. Each follower, once a victim of the arenas, was trained to fight with coordination, to anticipate and respond, to follow commands, but also to think and adapt. For the first time, the brutality of Nuceria became a lesson, not a weapon. Angron taught them that strength was not only in muscle or weaponry, but in intelligence, in loyalty, and in trust. Combat drills became exercises in teamwork. Lessons of survival became lessons in tactics. He forged the Legion into a force unlike any the galaxy had yet seen. Fierce, yes, but disciplined. Aggressive, yes, but guided by clarity rather than compulsion. The Emperor watched silently at first, allowing Angron to shape his forces as he saw fit. When he finally spoke, it was not to give orders, but to offer guidance. "A legion is more than strength," he said. "It is loyalty, unity, and purpose. You have endured what no one else could. Now you must shape the future, not merely react to it." Under Angron's leadership, the World Eaters quickly began to distinguish themselves from other legions. They were not the mindless berserkers the galaxy would have known. Their fury, while intense, was directed, tempered by strategy, and underpinned by loyalty. Angron instilled in them the concept of restraint, a difficult lesson for men who had only known cruelty and survival, but he demonstrated it through example. He fought with ferocity when necessary, but he also knew when to hold back, when to command, when to think. As weeks passed aboard the Emperor's ship, Angron became more than a leader. He became a mentor, a tactician, and a symbol of hope for those who had never known it. Each soldier under his command was no longer merely a survivor of Nuceria's horrors, but a participant in a vision of a disciplined, loyal, and powerful legion that could shape the fate of worlds. He taught them to value one another, to act in unison, and to recognize that strength alone was meaningless without guidance and strategy. The Emperor occasionally conferred with him in private, observing, questioning, guiding without imposing. "Your choices define your legion," the Emperor said once, as they watched a training exercise unfold in the simulated arenas aboard the ship. "Do not let the past dictate what your sons will become. Forge them in purpose, not pain. Lead them wisely." Angron understood. The memory of Nuceria's arenas, of the cruelty, of the death and suffering would always be a part of him, but it would no longer dictate his path. The butcher's nails, never implanted, had spared him the psychic torment that had destroyed so many others. His mind was clear, his spirit intact, and his rage could now be channeled into purpose rather than madness. He was not a monster, he was a warrior, a son, a leader, and a protector. The first campaigns under Angron's command were designed to train the Legion in real combat. Worlds that had known only oppression and fear now faced the disciplined might of the World Eaters, a legion capable of precision, coordination, and decisive action. They did not slaughter indiscriminately. They liberated, neutralized threats strategically, and ensured that civilian populations were spared when possible. Angron's moral clarity became the guiding principle of the Legion, a stark contrast to the path that the galaxy would have expected from him. Through all this, Angron's bond with the Emperor grew, not one of blind obedience, but of mutual respect. The Emperor recognized that here was a son who could think, who could act, who could lead without being twisted by anger or desperation. Angron recognized the Emperor not as a god demanding loyalty, but as a father offering guidance, resources, and purpose. It was a partnership forged not through pain or compulsion, but through recognition of ability, responsibility, and trust. And yet, even in this alternate timeline, Angron remained vigilant. He knew that the galaxy was vast, that enemies were many, and that betrayal could come from any corner. But for the first time in his life, he understood that vigilance was strengthened not by rage, but by strategy, discipline, and loyalty. The World Eaters, molded under his guidance, became a living testament to this principle. By the time the fleet reached the fringes of Imperial space, the 12th Legion had become something extraordinary, a force forged in survival but elevated by clarity, a legion capable of great fury yet tempered by reason, a group of warriors who could face any enemy without succumbing to madness. Angron himself stood among them, not as a monster to be feared, but as a leader to be followed, a Primarch unbroken, uncorrupted, and unyielding in purpose. The stars awaited. The galaxy was a chessboard of countless worlds, countless fates, and countless threats. And as Angron looked across the void, he understood that his choice on Nuceria, to protect those he loved, to lead with purpose rather than rage, had already begun to change the course of history. This was a galaxy where the Red Angel remained unbroken, a galaxy where the World Eaters could become more than berserkers, and where the decisions of one Primarch could alter the balance of all things yet to come. And so the Emperor's arrival, the liberation of the enslaved, and the formation of a disciplined legion marked the beginning of a new chapter in the galaxy's history, one in which the rage of Angron would not be a curse, but a tool wielded with wisdom, courage, and loyalty.
Shaping the fate of the Imperium in ways the universe had never imagined. The stars had always been a distant canvas for Angron, glimpsed from the red dust of Nuceria or the cramped quarters of a slave camp. Now, aboard the Emperor's fleet, they stretched endlessly, vast and filled with potential. each world awaiting liberation, each system waiting to be touched by the power of the Great Crusade, was an opportunity to test the principles Angron had forged: loyalty, strategy, and clarity of mind. The Emperor had granted him autonomy over the 12th Legion, trusting not only in his strength, but in his wisdom. Other Primarchs had received similar responsibilities, yet none approached their task with the combination of discipline and empathy that Angron now embodied. His legion, trained in the crucible of survival rather than fury, moved with precision across the stars. They were a shock to their enemies, not for mindless slaughter, but for the almost preternatural coordination of their assaults. Systems that had been oppressed for centuries found themselves liberated, often without the wholesale carnage that might have been expected from Nuceria's brutal sun. Angron's first campaigns were not without challenge. Entire worlds had been enslaved or ruled by tyrants who had underestimated the galaxy's new defenders. Yet each battle, each skirmish, revealed the growth of the World Eaters under his guidance. Angron implemented tactics that combined the discipline of a military strategist with the improvisational skills honed in the gladiatorial arenas. His forces were swift, precise, and adaptive, able to anticipate enemy maneuvers and respond in unison. Where others relied on sheer brute force, Angron relied on foresight. Where others saw chaos, he saw patterns to exploit. Among his legion, he fostered an unbreakable sense of unity. He had seen the horrors of slavery, the fractures caused by fear and mistrust. He refused to allow similar divisions to fester within his soldiers. Bonds of trust were reinforced with exercises that tested not just strength, but judgment, empathy, and adaptability. Angron's leadership style was unconventional by Imperial standards. He encouraged debate among his captains, allowed his lieutenants autonomy, and emphasized moral clarity alongside martial skill. In this way, the Legion became more than a fighting force. It became a disciplined organism, capable of independent thought, yet united under a single purpose. The Emperor observed the progress with measured approval. "You have taken what could have been rage and transformed it into strength with purpose," he said, speaking to Angron privately in the command chamber aboard the fleet. "Your legion is unlike any other. They are capable of horrors if misled, yet they are guided by a principle that many of your brothers lack. Protect it, nurture it, and the galaxy will remember your wisdom long after it forgets your fury." Angron's response was not boastful. He understood the weight of command and the responsibilities that came with it. "I do not seek glory," he said. "I seek justice. I will not allow my warriors to become the monsters we once were forced to endure. They fight, but not for vengeance. They fight to uphold what we believe in, not what we have suffered." In the early months of the Crusade, other Primarchs took notice. Some, like Horus and Ferrus Manus, observed with curiosity and admiration, intrigued by the efficiency and cohesion of a legion that operated differently from the others. Others, such as Fulgrim or Angron's future counterpart Logar, regarded the disciplined yet restrained tactics with suspicion. A legion trained for clarity and morality, yet equipped with unparalleled skill and ferocity, could challenge not only the enemies of the Imperium, but the expectations of their peers. Angron himself maintained a measured distance from these rivalries, understanding the politics of brotherhood and command without becoming embroiled. He observed, assessed, and learned, a far cry from the impulsive, rage-driven Primarch the galaxy had once known.
He forged alliances when necessary, respected authority when warranted, and always ensured that his legion remained focused on the task at hand. In doing so, he began to define the World Eaters not by their bloodlust, but by their precision and purpose. Even in the midst of campaign after campaign, Angron never allowed complacency to take hold. Each conquered world was a lesson, each liberated population a reminder of what could be achieved when brutality was tempered by intelligence. He encouraged his warriors to understand the systems they sought to liberate, to comprehend the cultures and traditions of the people, and to minimize unnecessary destruction. The World Eaters, under his guidance, became a paradox, a legion born of hardship, yet refined into an instrument of controlled fury, a force capable of delivering justice without succumbing to it. The Emperor occasionally joined him in the field, not to lead, but to observe. "Your methods are effective," the Emperor remarked, during one campaign on a resource-rich system controlled by tyrants who had enslaved millions. "But remember, Angron, the galaxy is not static. Power shifts, alliances fracture. You must anticipate not just the immediate threat, but the ripples of your actions across light years." Angron listened carefully, absorbing the lesson. His mind, free of the psychic torment of the butcher's nails, was capable of weighing long-term consequences. He considered each action not as vengeance, but as a strategic choice, a principle that would define the World Eaters in this timeline. And as each campaign concluded, the Legion grew not only in numbers and strength, but in discipline, loyalty, and foresight. The bonds between Angron and his captains deepened as well. They trusted him not because he was physically unstoppable, but because he had endured what none of them could have survived and still maintained clarity of purpose. Where others would have instilled fear to command obedience, Angron instilled respect through guidance, mentorship, and example. A culture of loyalty and honor blossomed within the ranks, unusual among legions known for their ferocity and untempered aggression. As the Great Crusade pressed onward, the reputation of the World Eaters began to spread. Systems that had known only oppression and chaos now whispered of a legion that could conquer without destroying unnecessarily, that could deliver punishment without abandoning principle. And while other legions continued their campaigns with indiscriminate fury, Angron's legion became an example, a demonstration that discipline could coexist with strength, that clarity could coexist with aggression, that loyalty could coexist with independence. Yet even as he trained, commanded, and guided, Angron never lost sight of his own identity. He was a Primarch, yes, but he was also a son of Nuceria, shaped by its cruelty and tempered by his survival. He never forgot the chains, the arenas, the suffering he had endured, but he allowed those memories to inform his judgment rather than consume him. In this way, Angron became not only a warrior and a leader, but a mentor, a symbol, and a hope to those who had been abandoned by fate. And as the stars stretched endlessly before him, Angron understood that the choices made in the shadow of Nuceria had forever altered the galaxy. In this timeline, the Red Angel was unbroken. The World Eaters were disciplined. The crusade continued, not with uncontrolled fury, but with strategy, wisdom, and purpose. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, the Emperor observed, not as a distant god demanding obedience, but as a father recognizing the triumph of will, clarity, and loyalty in a son who had been given the chance to remain whole.
The stars stretched endlessly before the fleet, a vast canvas on which the Great Crusade would be painted. Angron had become more than a leader.
He had become a force of reckoning, a symbol of a legion tempered by clarity rather than rage. Yet even as victories accumulated, the complexity of command deepened. Liberation was not merely a question of defeating tyrants. It required judgment, patience, and the foresight to anticipate the consequences of every action. Angron's mind, free from the psychic torment of the butcher's nails, processed each challenge with precision. Other Primarchs began to take note. Horus, ever ambitious and politically astute, observed the efficiency and cohesion of the World Eaters with cautious curiosity. "A legion that can fight without succumbing to savagery," Horus remarked to his lieutenants, "is a dangerous example. Discipline in a legion bred for fury will attract attention and envy." Ferrus Manus, the iron-handed, admired the ingenuity of Angron's tactics, noting the subtlety of his maneuvers compared to other legions' brute force approaches. Fulgrim, in contrast, regarded the restraint with thinly veiled disdain, viewing it as a missed opportunity for glory and dominance. Angron, however, did not allow the opinions of his brothers to dictate his actions. He focused on results, on the lives of his warriors, and on the principle that had guided him from the arenas of Nuceria. Strength must be tempered by wisdom, and loyalty by understanding. The World Eaters advanced across systems with efficiency, liberating oppressed populations while neutralizing resistance strategically rather than indiscriminately. Every engagement became a lesson in leadership for the Legion, and every victory a reinforcement of discipline over instinct. Yet the Great Crusade was not without peril. Enemies were diverse and cunning. Rogue warlords, Xenos marauders, and rebellious planetary governors tested the limits of Angron's strategies. Each battle demanded adaptation, improvisation, and a relentless commitment to minimizing unnecessary loss of life. Where the canonical Angron might have unleashed unbridled fury, this Angron measured his strikes. He learned to anticipate not only the movements of his enemies, but also the unintended consequences of victory. Populations spared in one world could become allies. Worlds devastated in another could fuel future rebellions. He understood the interconnectedness of the Imperium, and he acted with that awareness. Within his legion, Angron instilled a culture of resilience and unity. Every warrior understood their role. Every captain was accountable, and every decision was weighed against the principles Angron had forged in his youth. He encouraged debate, rewarded ingenuity, and demanded loyalty not out of fear, but out of trust. The soldiers of the World Eaters learned to fight as one organism, each unit anticipating the other's movements, each warrior respecting the judgment of their leaders. This cohesion became their greatest strength, allowing them to confront larger and more powerful enemies with precision and effectiveness. Even in moments of triumph, Angron remained vigilant. He knew the galaxy was vast and unpredictable. Every conquered system, every defeated foe brought new responsibilities. He could not allow complacency to root, nor could he permit the arrogance that often followed victory. His leadership was a continuous process of assessment, reflection, and adaptation. He trained his captains not only in tactics, but in judgment, teaching them to anticipate the political, social, and military consequences of their actions. In doing so, he ensured that the World Eaters remained disciplined, capable of sustained campaigns, and loyal not only to him, but to the ideals he sought to uphold. Interactions with other Primarchs became a delicate balance of diplomacy, rivalry, and observation. Angron was respected for his clarity and skill, yet envied for his success in shaping a legion without succumbing to fury.
Robodi Gilliman,
observing from distant campaigns, admired the organizational excellence, noting the potential for lessons applicable across the Imperium. Lorgar, the word-bearer, regarded the disciplined legion with a mixture of curiosity and concern, sensing that loyalty not forged in anguish but in purpose could challenge his own philosophy of devotion. Through these interactions, Angron learned subtle lessons in leadership that extended beyond combat. He understood the importance of alliances, the dangers of envy and rivalry, and the necessity of maintaining clarity under pressure. The Great Crusade was not merely a military campaign, it was a crucible for leadership, morality, and strategy, and Angron thrived within it. His mind, unbroken and unmanipulated, allowed him to anticipate conflicts before they erupted, mediate tensions before they escalated, and guide his legion with a level of foresight unmatched among his brothers. Yet, challenges remained. Some worlds resisted not with armies, but with ideology, intrigue, and subterfuge. Angron's legion faced political manipulation, attempts at betrayal, and the temptation of immediate, violent retribution. He had the power to respond with overwhelming force, to unleash the latent fury within his soldiers, but he restrained them, teaching the value of patience, negotiation, and strategic application of power. His victories became measured, decisive, and instructive, transforming the World Eaters from a legion feared solely for their brutality into one respected for their effectiveness and their discipline. As the campaigns continued, the Emperor maintained his presence, guiding Angron when necessary, but largely allowing him autonomy. "Your strength is unmatched," the Emperor said during a strategy session aboard the flagship, "but it is your clarity that sets you apart. Never forget that a legion is more than its weapons or its warriors. It is an extension of your mind, your judgment, and your purpose. Fail here, and the consequences ripple across the galaxy." Angron absorbed the counsel, integrating it into every decision. He instructed his legion to consider the long-term ramifications of each campaign, to assess the needs of liberated populations, and to act in accordance with principles rather than impulse. The transformation of the 12th Legion was unprecedented. A force born of hardship and suffering had become a model of disciplined, intelligent warfare. And yet, the shadow of future conflict lingered. Other Primarchs, observing Angron's rise, began to question the stability of their own legions, the morality of their campaigns, and the unpredictability of loyalty. In this timeline, the seeds of the Horus Heresy would struggle to take root where Angron's clarity and loyalty remained unshakable. His example began to influence others, subtly shaping alliances, inspiring respect, and fostering tension among those unaccustomed to restraint paired with immense power. As the Great Crusade reached new sectors of the galaxy, the reputation of the World Eaters spread like wildfire. Worlds once thought hopelessly subjugated now whispered of liberation, of a disciplined and strategic force that could conquer without unnecessary bloodshed. And while other legions were feared for their destructive capabilities, the World Eaters were both feared and respected, feared for their skill, respected for their judgment. Angron, the unbroken Red Angel, continued to lead with unwavering clarity. His campaigns, his mentorship, and his example became the benchmark by which all other legions were measured. The galaxy watched, unaware of the divergence that had saved a Primarch from torment, and in doing so, preserved the integrity of a son whose influence would forever reshape the trajectory of the Imperium. By the time the first cycles of the Great Crusade concluded, Angron had not only secured countless systems,
liberated millions, and forged a disciplined legion, but he had also established a precedent that power tempered with clarity and guided by purpose could achieve far more than fury alone. The Red Angel remained unbroken, and the World Eaters stood as a testament to what loyalty, discipline, and leadership could accomplish in a galaxy where the forces of chaos and ambition were always lurking. And thus, the stage was set for the next chapter in the saga of the unbroken Primarch, a chapter where alliances, rivalries, and the delicate balance of loyalty and ambition would shape the fate of the Imperium in ways no one could yet foresee. The Great Crusade was far from over, but the course had been irrevocably altered, and the shadow of an unbroken Angron loomed large over the stars.
The Great Crusade had matured into a complex web of campaigns, politics, and diplomacy. Worlds were liberated, systems brought into the fold of the Imperium, and countless enemies crushed. Yet as the Imperium expanded, so too did the seeds of tension among the Emperor's sons. Even the most disciplined legions began to chafe under the pressures of power, expectation, and rivalry. In this volatile landscape, Angron and his World Eaters stood apart, not for their strength, but for their clarity. Angron had learned to observe, to anticipate, and to measure not only the enemy, but his allies. Other Primarchs, accustomed to viewing the galaxy through the lens of ego, ambition, or ideology, found him unsettling. Where Fulgrim reveled in beauty and perfection, Angron valued precision and pragmatism. Where Horus honed charisma into influence, Angron honed loyalty into cohesion. Even Robuti Gilliman, the meticulous organizer, recognized that the World Eater's cohesion and discipline were extraordinary, a product of a Primarch who had endured the extremes of suffering and emerged unbroken. The first council meeting convened aboard the Emperor's flagship, a gathering of the most powerful beings in human history. Tensions crackled in the air, subtle and dangerous, as the Primarchs discussed the allocation of resources and the strategy for upcoming campaigns. Angron listened more than he spoke, observing the subtle cues of rivalry, pride, and ambition. He understood that diplomacy, like warfare, required planning, timing, and insight. Words could wound as sharply as blades, and in this chamber he would wield understanding rather than fury. Horus leaned forward, his eyes glinting with ambition. The galaxy is vast, but we move too cautiously. There are systems ripe for conquest that are being delayed by overcaution. We must strike with certainty and decisiveness. Angron's gaze met Horus's, steady and unflinching. Decisive action is necessary, but strategy is not merely speed. It is understanding the long-term consequences. Reckless action breeds resentment, rebellion, and chaos. A legion acts best when its victories are sustainable, not fleeting.
A murmur of approval came from some quarters, but others, like Fulgrim, regarded him with barely concealed disdain. And yet caution is often a cloak for weakness, Fulgrim said, voice dripping with derision. The galaxy respects power, not hesitation. Your restraint may be admirable, Angron, but it will not earn fear or loyalty where it is needed. Angron's response was measured. Power without purpose is fleeting. Strength without discipline is self-destructive. If we govern by fear alone, we sow the seeds of rebellion. I have seen this on Nuceria. I will not repeat it across the stars. The room fell silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. None of the assembled Primarchs had confronted their peers with such clarity and conviction. Angron's words carried weight because they were grounded in experience, in survival, and in understanding. This was not bravado. This was wisdom forged in blood and trial, tempered by clarity of mind. Outside the council chamber, Angron's legion prepared for the next campaign. The World Eaters had become a model of discipline, their training rigorous yet precise, their loyalty to their Primarch unwavering. Unlike other legions whose actions were colored by rage, ideology, or vanity, the 12th Legion moved with coordination, anticipating challenges before they arrived. Each warrior understood not just tactics, but the rationale behind them, the moral and strategic implications of their actions. Yet the galaxy was not a simple place. Rebellion, corruption, and the ambitions of men, both mortal and immortal, created a tension that could ignite at any moment. Angron was aware of subtle manipulations among the Primarchs, rivalries disguised as counsel, envy masquerading as concern. And he understood that the Emperor's absence from daily operations, a necessity for the greater scope of the crusade, left space for ambition to fester. When a disturbance arose on a recently liberated system, Angron was dispatched to investigate. A local governor, previously loyal to tyrants overthrown by the World Eaters, had stirred unrest among the population. The challenge was not martial, but political. To pacify without oppression, to assert authority without cruelty. Angron's approach was methodical. He met with community leaders, listened to grievances, and applied decisive measures only where necessary. In doing so, he demonstrated the value of leadership informed by clarity rather than fury. News of this approach reached other Primarchs. Some were intrigued, seeing the potential for lessons applicable to their own forces. Others were unsettled, recognizing that a legion that could exercise judgment, restraint, and discipline might outshine legions that relied on untempered aggression. The ripple effects of Angron's leadership were subtle but profound. He was shaping not only his legion, but the perception of what leadership could be, altering expectations and standards across the Imperium. Yet challenges persisted. Rivalries simmered. Subtle acts of sabotage and subversion appeared among fleets and councils, and Angron understood that leadership required vigilance beyond the battlefield. He trained his captains to recognize manipulation, to weigh counsel critically, and to act decisively when deception was uncovered. This discipline extended to every corner of the 12th Legion, creating a culture of resilience and insight that was unprecedented. Amid these challenges, Angron maintained his principles. He refused to use his legion to enforce obedience through fear, refused to exploit weakness for personal gain, and refused to allow anger to dictate action. His decisions were deliberate, guided by both morality and strategy. In a galaxy where ambition often superseded principle, he became a living example of the balance between power and responsibility. The Emperor observed from afar, his gaze weighing upon Angron's choices. You are unlike your brothers, where others are shaped by fury, envy, or ideology. You are shaped by experience and judgment. That is your strength and your challenge. Others will test it, consciously or unconsciously. Do not let them sway you from the path of purpose. Angron nodded. I have learned from Nuceria. I will not allow history to repeat itself. My legion will not be defined by rage, but by clarity and loyalty. That is the legacy I choose to leave. And so, the stage was set. The crusade continued, and with it the delicate dance of alliances, rivalries, and loyalties among the Primarchs. Angron's influence began to extend beyond his legion, shaping not only the conduct of campaigns, but the expectations of brotherhood, command, and responsibility. The unbroken Red Angel had become a fulcrum upon which the stability of the Imperium could rest, a symbol of restraint, clarity, and unwavering loyalty in a galaxy teetering on the brink of chaos.
The stars beyond the fleet stretched in silent immensity, indifferent to the ambitions and rivalries of men, even Primarchs. Yet within the Imperium, tensions simmered, subtle and dangerous, as the vast expanse of conquered systems and the promises of the Great Crusade drew out ambition, jealousy, and unease. In the midst of this growing pressure, Angron's World Eaters became a stabilizing force, a demonstration that loyalty and clarity could coexist with formidable power. The unrest began with whispers, Small deviations among the fleet captains and governors, questioning the distribution of resources, the hierarchy of command, and the intentions of those who held influence over the emperor's strategies. Some Primarchs took these murmurs as opportunities to manipulate, testing loyalties and gauging responses. Where others might have acted with suspicion, vengeance, or preemptive strikes, Angron observed first, gathering information, assessing motivations, and measuring the potential consequences of intervention. When word reached him that a contingent of another legion had pushed a system's population into rebellion through heavy-handed tactics, Angron convened his captains and lieutenants. "Strength without judgment breeds chaos," he said, voice steady, resonant but devoid of threat. "We must act where necessary, but our influence must be measured. Every action we take sets an example, not just for the people we protect, but for every legion watching us. If we lose clarity, we risk becoming the very tyrants we fight against." He deployed a detachment to the troubled system with precise objectives: restore order, neutralize threats without unnecessary bloodshed, and demonstrate authority without cruelty. His captains executed the plan with a combination of martial skill and careful judgment, freeing the population from the oppressors while leaving infrastructure intact. The result was not merely victory. It was a testament to the principle that discipline and loyalty could coexist with compassion, and that strength could be wielded with purpose rather than impulse. News of these actions reverberated through the corridors of command and across the fleets. Some Primarchs noted the effectiveness of restraint, impressed by the capacity for measured power. Others, however, felt unease. In a galaxy where intimidation often dictated compliance, a legion that could win through clarity rather than terror was unsettling. Rumors spread that Angron's legion was evolving beyond a mere instrument of war, becoming a standard by which others might be judged and envied. The first direct test of Angron's resolve came in the form of a political challenge. A council of Primarchs debated the governance of newly integrated systems, and rival factions began to pressure the Emperor's advisors to favor punitive measures. Angron, attending in representation of his legion, spoke with deliberate clarity. "Authority granted by force is temporary. Authority earned through reason and justice endures. If we govern through fear, we invite rebellion. If we lead through judgment, we inspire loyalty. Consider the consequences of your choices before you condemn systems or peoples indiscriminately." Some murmured in approval. Others scowled at what they considered interference. Fulgrim leaned forward, a smirk of subtle condescension on his face. "And you believe that mercy will be sufficient to maintain control? Power is respected, Angron, not courtesy. Do not confuse restraint with superiority."
Angron's gaze did not waver. Restraint is not weakness, it is discipline. The galaxy will respect those who act with purpose, not those who strike indiscriminately. My legion has demonstrated this. We have liberated, protected, and conquered without forsaking principle. There is strength in that. Do not dismiss it because it differs from your own methods. The debate concluded without immediate resolution, but Angron's reputation had shifted. Other Primarchs began to observe the World Eater's campaigns with a new perspective, recognizing the power inherent in a legion whose fury was guided by clarity. It was a subtle influence, a seed planted that would later define the dynamics of loyalty and trust among the Emperor's sons. Even as these political currents swirled, the operational tempo of the crusade continued. Angron's legion undertook campaigns that tested their limits,
navigating hostile systems, liberating populations under duress, and countering threats that required both tactical brilliance and strategic patience. Angron's leadership was the cornerstone of every operation. He balanced aggression with judgment, loyalty with autonomy, and clarity with empathy. In every battle, he reinforced the culture he had established among his warriors, a culture of discernment, cohesion, and unwavering purpose. The interactions with other Primarchs deepened. Some, like Guilliman and Therasmanus, sought his counsel, intrigued by the implications of his approach. Others, like Lorgar and Fulgrim, regarded him warily, aware that a model of discipline and restraint challenged the assumptions upon which their influence rested. Angron neither courted approval nor provoked hostility unnecessarily. He acted according to principle, guided by the experiences of Nuceria and the clarity preserved by his unbroken mind. One incident tested him more than any other. A faction within the fleet, influenced by envy and ambition, attempted to undermine his authority by sowing dissent among newly integrated planetary forces. The aim was subtle: to fracture the loyalty of the Legion, to create internal tension, and to force Angron into a position where his authority might be questioned. He discovered the plot through observation and insight, confronting the conspirators with calculated precision. Instead of retribution through rage, he applied strategy, isolation of the instigators, public demonstration of principles, and clear communication with his captains and soldiers. The plot was neutralized, loyalty reinforced, and the lesson was clear: discipline was both shield and sword. Through these trials, Angron's identity as a Primarch matured. He understood that strength alone could not secure the Imperium. Clarity, loyalty, and purpose were equally essential. He balanced the needs of his legion, the expectations of his peers, and the will of the Emperor with unprecedented skill. His actions demonstrated that even a legion born of hardship and cruelty could rise above its origins to embody principle and wisdom. The Emperor continued to observe, providing guidance but rarely interference. "You have avoided the pitfalls of wrath, envy, and indulgence," the Emperor remarked during a private discussion. "But remember, others will test you, not merely for power, but for influence. Your strength is discipline. Guard it well, for it is rare among men and Primarchs alike." Angron's response was quiet but firm. "I have learned from the past. I will not allow my legion or myself to be used as a tool of ambition. We fight with purpose. We lead with judgment. That is our path, and it will not be broken by envy, manipulation, or the shadows of ambition." By the end of this phase of the Crusade, the World Eaters had become a touchstone for what a legion could be when fury was guided by clarity. Their reputation spread not as the mere instruments of rage that history once recorded, but as a disciplined, intelligent force capable of decisive action without succumbing to the chaos of emotion. Systems across the galaxy whispered of their victories and methods, and even the Emperor's other sons could not ignore the implications. The stage was set for the future. As tensions among Primarchs increased, as ambitions and rivalries intensified, Angron's unbroken clarity and the loyalty of his legion became a counterbalance, a stabilizing influence in a galaxy teetering on the brink of schism. The seeds of rebellion would appear elsewhere, but where Angron led, loyalty remained unbroken, clarity prevailed, and purpose guided every blade. In the darkness between stars, the Red Angel stood resolute, his gaze unwavering. The Imperium marched onward, yet its fate was no longer predestined. Angron's path had diverged from the one written in the history of rage and tragedy. Here, the World Eaters were more than warriors. They were exemplars, and the galaxy, though unaware,
had begun to shift beneath the influence of a Primarch who remained unbroken, undaunted, and unyielding in the balance of loyalty and purpose. The Imperium had reached a critical threshold. The Great Crusade, which had begun as a campaign of liberation and unification, now approached the outer edges of imperial space, where ambitions collided and loyalties were tested. Worlds once distant from the Emperor's influence were now drawn into the orbit of his power, and with that expansion came opportunity, tension, and the subtle stirrings of betrayal. It was a time of both triumph and uncertainty, a crucible in which the fates of Primarchs, legions, and entire civilizations were being forged. Angron observed these developments from the command bridge of the flagship, the massive form of the Red Angel silhouetted against the swirling expanse of stars. His legion, the World Eaters, had grown into a model of discipline and loyalty, their campaigns executed with precision and foresight. Yet even as victories accumulated, he understood the fragility of order in a galaxy brimming with ambition. The lessons of Nuceria had taught him that rage alone could destroy, that unchecked fury could corrupt even the strongest of men. In the wider Imperium, these lessons were more relevant than ever. Horus, the favored son and war master of the Imperium, had begun to exhibit the first subtle signs of discontent. His charisma and ambition drew other Primarchs into his orbit, fostering political networks and alliances that, while ostensibly loyal to the Emperor, were also infused with personal agendas. Whispers of dissatisfaction began to surface, framed as concern for the Imperium's future, but carrying the weight of manipulation. Horus, as always, presented his intentions as noble, yet Angron's insight allowed him to perceive the undercurrents that others overlooked. It began with small challenges, disagreements over the distribution of resources, disputes over strategic priorities, subtle questioning of authority in council chambers. Angron navigated these tensions with the same clarity that defined his legion. He spoke only when necessary, weighed counsel critically, and applied decisive action with precision. His interventions were never about asserting dominance. They were about preserving stability and ensuring that loyalty and purpose prevailed over ambition and envy. During a council convened to determine the next wave of campaigns, Horus leaned forward, his gaze assessing, calculating. "Some systems are being governed too gently," he said, his tone carrying both conviction and the suggestion of criticism. "Authority must be respected, or it is meaningless. A display of strength ensures compliance." Angron's response was measured but firm. "Strength without clarity is fleeting. Authority is earned, not demanded. If we govern through fear or unchecked aggression, we sow resentment that will fracture the Imperium from within. Loyalty must be cultivated, not coerced." The murmurs of approval and skepticism were almost audible. Some Primarchs admired Angron's articulation and the evident results of his campaigns. Others bristled at the challenge to their assumptions. Fulgrim's lips curled in disdain. "You speak of loyalty and clarity as if they are superior to power and influence. Yet history is written by those who can wield both. Restraint is admirable, but it does not inspire awe or command." Angron's gaze did not waver. "Restraint is not weakness. Power wielded without purpose is fleeting. A legion's true strength is in its cohesion, discipline, and judgment. That is what sustains victory and fosters lasting allegiance." Horus listened carefully, his expression unreadable. A spark of curiosity mingled with irritation. Angron's perspective threatened the subtle dynamics Horus had begun to cultivate among the Primarchs. It challenged assumptions about leadership, loyalty, and the role of strength in commanding influence. In that moment, the seeds of potential divergence were sown, yet Angron's clarity prevented escalation. His voice, calm and authoritative, tempered the ambitions of those who might have otherwise sought to exploit divisions. Beyond the council chambers, Angron's legion continued its campaigns across newly integrated sectors. Each operation tested both skill and judgment, liberating populations, neutralizing insurgent factions, and enforcing law without tyranny. The World Eaters became not only a military force, but a stabilizing presence, demonstrating to the galaxy that strength could coexist with principle, and that loyalty could be nurtured without fear. Interactions with other Primarchs provided further tests of leadership. Some sought counsel, intrigued by Angron's methods and the cohesion of his legion. Rubute Guliman observed carefully, analyzing the integration of discipline, morale, and strategic planning. Ferris Manos evaluated logistical efficiency, noting the subtle effectiveness of Angron's command structure. Even Lorgar, who would later be a voice of ideological temptation, regarded the World Eaters with cautious curiosity, sensing a rare combination of loyalty and insight. Angron, however, remained focused on the broader mission, the stability of the Imperium and the welfare of his warriors. He understood that the choices he made now would echo far into the future. Each liberated world, each campaign conducted with measured force, reinforced the reputation of the World Eaters not as instruments of rage, but as exemplars of disciplined strength. This reputation subtly began to influence perceptions across the Imperium. Yet threats persisted. Agents of rebellion, subtle manipulations among fleet officers, and the ambitions of rival Primarchs presented constant challenges. Angron's response was strategic. Isolate the instigators, restore order through precise intervention, and reinforce the principles of loyalty and cohesion within the Legion. Every action was deliberate, every decision informed by clarity and long-term vision. The World Eaters, under his command, became a model of effectiveness and reliability, a benchmark against which other legions were measured. Even in the midst of these trials, Angron did not lose sight of the lessons from Nuceria. He understood the destructive potential of unchecked fury, the fragility of loyalty, and the subtle power of perception. His interactions with other Primarchs were governed by observation, anticipation, and measured intervention. He acted not out of ego, but out of principle, and this distinction became increasingly apparent as political tensions rose. The Emperor, observing from afar, noted the unique influence of his son. "You have tempered fury with judgment," he remarked in a rare private audience. "Others will test your clarity, and ambition will seek to exploit your restraint. Stand firm, Angron. The path you have chosen is not the easiest, but it is the one that will preserve what must endure." Angron absorbed the counsel with solemnity. "I will not allow the Imperium to be fractured by ambition or manipulated by envy. My legion and I will remain steadfast. Strength with purpose, loyalty with clarity, that is the course we must maintain." As the campaigns continued, the presence of an unbroken Angron began to alter the dynamics of the Imperium. Rival Primarchs who might have acted impulsively or manipulatively were moderated by his example. Systems that might have fallen into chaos were stabilized. Loyalty, rather than fear or coercion, became a guiding principle for interactions across the fleet. And the World Eaters, once anticipated to be a legion defined by rage, became a force whose reputation for discipline, clarity, and effectiveness reshaped the expectations of what a legion could be. In the darkness of space, as the fleet advanced into the uncharted fringes of human civilization, the Red Angel stood resolute. The seeds of rebellion and ambition had been sown elsewhere, but in the presence of Angron's clarity, they found no fertile ground. The Imperium marched onward, yet its fate, long thought predestined, had begun to diverge. Here, loyalty endured, clarity prevailed, and strength was wielded with purpose. The galaxy had not yet seen the full consequences of an unbroken Angron.
But the trajectory had already shifted. The tides of the Imperium had shifted subtly, imperceptibly to most, yet unmistakably to those attuned to the currents of power and ambition. Whispers of dissent echoed among the Primarchs and fleets. Shadows of envy, ideological ambition, and the subtle manipulations of self-interest began to ripple through the corridors of command. Even Horus, favored of the Emperor, moved with ambition that teetered between loyalty and desire for autonomy, testing the bounds of obedience while cloaking it in rhetoric of necessity. Angron observed these currents with a careful, unflinching eye. The lessons of Nuceria had forged him not merely into a warrior, but into a strategist of human behavior. Where other Primarchs might have reacted with pride, offense, or manipulation, he calculated and anticipated, positioning himself and his legion as both stabilizer and exemplar. The World Eaters, now renowned not for untempered fury, but for disciplined precision, became instruments of influence beyond the battlefield. It began with small divergences. A fleet captain, swayed by the subtle arguments of a rival Primarch, attempted to redirect resources intended for a humanitarian mission to fuel personal ambition. The consequences, if unchecked, could have escalated into mutiny, undermining loyalty across multiple legions. Angron addressed the matter swiftly, convening a council of his captains and discussing the principles of judgment, loyalty, and clarity. Then he engaged directly with the instigators, isolating their influence and reinforcing the importance of cohesion and fidelity to the Emperor's will. The result was instructive. Not only were the immediate threats neutralized, but the example set radiated across nearby commands. Other Primarchs took note of the methodical balance of firmness and principle. Pharasmanes commented privately to Angron, "You wield authority in a way none of us have. You contain rebellion without inflaming it, guide without coercion." Angron's response was simple, measured. Authority guided by principle endures longer than fear or manipulation. History shows that well. Horus, observing these developments from his seat as War Master, felt the first unease that would later define the divergent course of the Heresy. Angron's influence, calm, disciplined, and unwavering, began to counteract the subtle manipulations and persuasive arguments Horus relied upon to build support. The Red Angel's loyalty was absolute, but it was not blind. It was grounded in judgment, principle, and clarity. Where Horus expected submission, he found reasoned autonomy tempered by fidelity. The friction was quiet but potent, the type that would shape the decisions of the coming decades. Angron's campaigns continued, expanding into sectors previously destabilized by internal conflict. Unlike the canonical narrative, this Angron approached these challenges not with mindless rage, but with strategic coordination. The liberation of a feudal world on the fringe of the Imperium required negotiation with local houses, the careful application of force, and a visible demonstration of loyalty to the Emperor. Where the canonical Angron might have indiscriminately massacred and left a fractured society in his wake, this Angron nurtured order. Leaders were removed, if corrupt, yes, but systems were stabilized, infrastructures preserved, and civilian populations safeguarded. Within the corridors of the Imperium, this precision began to alter expectations. Primarchs accustomed to operating on instinct and ambition were forced to reconsider the role of loyalty, judgment, and clarity.
Angron's example became both a mirror and a challenge. Could others maintain authority without descending into manipulation or brutality? Many began to admire the disciplined world eaters, while others, notably those with ambitions for Horus's rising faction, viewed it as an impediment to their influence. The Emperor, as ever, observed. In a rare private council, he spoke to Angron aboard the flagship, voice echoing with both gravitas and warmth. The shadows of ambition grow, yet you stand as a fulcrum of balance. Others will test loyalty, sow discord, and tempt even the faithful. Stand firm. Your clarity and your restraint will shape outcomes beyond what mere strength could accomplish.
Angron's reply was deliberate. I will not allow fury, envy, or manipulation to dictate the course of the Imperium. My legion, my actions, and my decisions will remain guided by principle, not impulse. The galaxy may attempt to twist ambition into chaos, but I will guard the loyalty we have built. Tensions escalated further as Horus maneuvered politically, rallying Primarchs under the pretext of autonomy and efficiency, while subtly fostering grievances. Attempts were made to sway legions with promises of glory, hints of injustice, and appeals to personal ambition. In most circumstances, this would have gone unchallenged, but Angron's presence altered the dynamics. His steadfastness, his influence over the world eaters, and his reputation for clarity became a stabilizing factor. He engaged directly with other Primarchs when subtle manipulations arose, advocating for principle over expedience, loyalty over ambition. One critical incident involved the integration of a partially autonomous sector. Horus had proposed measures that would consolidate authority under his command, ostensibly to ensure efficiency, but in reality centralizing influence in preparation for his eventual divergence. Angron, attending the council, raised concerns not as opposition, but as foresight. Efficiency is meaningless if loyalty is fractured. Centralization without trust sows dissent. We must consider the long-term stability of those we bring into the Imperium, not only their immediate compliance. The council's debates were tense, voices raised, eyes flashing with veiled intentions. Yet Angron's calm, reasoned presence moderated extremes. Other Primarchs, even those inclined to follow Horus's ambitions, were forced to weigh his perspective. The result was a compromise that preserved autonomy where needed, while reinforcing loyalty to the Emperor, delaying the fractures that would later define the Heresy. Angron's interventions extended beyond the council chambers. In the field, his legion neutralized conspiracies, prevented rogue uprisings, and acted as an exemplar to imperial governors and planetary leaders. Soldiers and civilians alike witnessed the balance of power and principle, understanding that loyalty could be inspired through justice rather than fear. In a galaxy where ambition and manipulation often dictated outcomes, the World Eater's example was unprecedented. Interactions with Horus were particularly delicate. The War Master, subtle and politically savvy, recognized the obstacle Angron represented. Attempts to draw him into debates of loyalty, ideology, or strategy were met not with defiance, but with reasoned dialogue, acknowledgement of legitimate concerns, and unwavering adherence to principle. Where Horus expected compromise, he found clarity. Where he sought submission, he found accountability and insight. The tension was quiet, but undeniable, shaping decisions that would reverberate through the coming years. By the end of these campaigns, the World Eaters had cemented their reputation, a legion whose loyalty was absolute, whose discipline was unmatched, and whose clarity shaped both battlefield victories and political stability. Systems liberated by their campaigns were stabilized, populations protected, and internal dissent suppressed, not through fear,
but through principle and guidance. Other legions took note, and even subtle manipulations by ambitious Primarchs were tempered in the face of Angron's example. As the pre-Heresy era drew closer to its inevitable breaking point, one truth became apparent. Where Angron led, loyalty endured, clarity prevailed, and ambition without principle was tempered. The galaxy remained on the brink of chaos, yet in this timeline, the Red Angel's unbroken will had altered its trajectory. The Horus Heresy, if it came, would not sweep unchallenged. Seeds of loyalty, discipline, and strategic insight had been sown in ways that could reshape the fate of the Imperium. In the darkness between stars, Angron stood resolute aboard his flagship, the disciplined legion arrayed behind him, prepared for any threat, whether external or emerging from within. The Great Crusade had reached a turning point, yet the path forward was now irrevocably altered. Loyalty had a champion, clarity had a sword, and the galaxy would remember the influence of a Primarch who had remained unbroken, and whose presence might change history itself. The Great Crusade had brought the Imperium to the edge of the galaxy, and with expansion came the shadows of ambition. Horus, favored son of the Emperor and War Master, had cultivated networks of influence, subtle manipulations, and whispered promises among those who hungered for power. Where history recorded the swift descent into betrayal, this timeline was different. The presence of Angron, the unbroken Red Angel, cast a stabilizing shadow that would alter the course of rebellion before it could fully ignite. Rumors of discontent spread through the fleet, the whispers carried not by open rebellion, but by subtle subversion. Some Primarchs hesitated, watching, calculating. Others, more impulsive, acted on their ambitions. Angron, observing these currents, moved with deliberate foresight. The lessons of Nuceria, the lessons of rage untempered, had honed his understanding of loyalty, influence, and the fragile nature of power. He knew that the moment Horus might attempt to tip the scales, clarity and decisive action could either preserve the Imperium or allow it to fracture. The first confrontations came not on battlefields, but in council chambers, strategy rooms, and the corridors of command. Horus proposed initiatives cloaked in necessity: consolidation of authority, reallocation of legions, and campaigns framed as efficiency measures. Each carried the potential to destabilize alliances, sow dissent, and test the loyalty of brothers. Angron's interventions were subtle yet decisive. He presented reasoned counterpoints, emphasized principle over expedience, and engaged in dialogue designed not to confront openly, but to expose manipulation. Authority is not preserved through deception, Angron stated during a heated council debate. Loyalty cannot be coerced or assumed. It must be earned through clarity and principle. Actions taken under the guise of efficiency that betray trust are not progress. They are seeds of chaos. Even Horus paused, recognizing the weight behind the words. The Red Angel's loyalty was absolute, yet it was informed, deliberate, and unflinching. This was not the mindless fury that had defined the canonical World Eaters. This was strategy, judgment, and authority forged in experience and clarity. As whispers of rebellion grew, Angron's influence extended beyond council. He engaged directly with Primarchs on the cusp of deviation, reinforcing the principles of loyalty, judgment, and responsibility.
In some instances, subtle manipulations intended to draw legions toward Horus's orbit were neutralized by clear demonstrations of authority and foresight. Angron's interventions prevented immediate escalation, forestalling fractures that, in the canonical history, would have spread like wildfire. The Emperor, observing from afar, noted the unique role Angron played. "The shadows of betrayal gather," he said during a private audience, "but your clarity tempers the flame. Others will test you, seek to exploit your discipline, and attempt to bend your loyalty. Stand firm, Angron. You are the fulcrum upon which the stability of the Imperium may depend." Angron absorbed this counsel with solemnity. "I will not allow chaos to define the Imperium. Strength must be guided by principle, loyalty earned through trust, and action tempered by judgment. My legion and I will remain steadfast."
The onset of conflict manifested in scattered rebellions across the outer systems as agents of Horus attempted to preemptively secure support for the coming rupture. Angron's legion responded with precision. Unlike the canonical World Eaters, who might have annihilated without consideration, this legion stabilized systems, protected civilian populations, and neutralized insurgents with minimal collateral damage. Each engagement became an example of disciplined action and loyalty preserved, subtly undermining the momentum of the rebellion. Other Primarchs observed these campaigns with a mixture of respect and frustration. Some were inspired by the example of discipline and clarity. Others, particularly those drawn to Horus's ambition, were unnerved by the obstacle Angron represented. The Red Angel's presence, calm yet unyielding, complicated the subtle manipulations and alliances forming within the fleet. Where Horus sought to exploit uncertainty, he encountered foresight. Where ambition attempted to fracture loyalty, he faced cohesion reinforced by principle. A critical moment arrived when Horus sought to sway a legion through promises of glory and recognition, hinting at grievances that could be exploited to fracture loyalty. Angron intercepted the attempt not with open confrontation, but with counsel, dialogue, and demonstration of principle. He engaged with the leadership of the target legion, reminding them of their oaths, their purpose, and the broader stakes of loyalty to the Emperor. The outcome was remarkable. The legion remained aligned, trust preserved, and Horus's subtle manipulation was nullified before it could take root. Angron's approach demonstrated a new paradigm of leadership in the Imperium, power coupled with clarity, loyalty guided by judgment, and influence exercised without coercion. The World Eaters became not just warriors, but exemplars, a model of how legions could act with purpose, discipline, and cohesion, even under immense pressure. The Emperor's observation confirmed the significance of these actions. "You have altered the trajectory of rebellion," he noted. "Where others might succumb to fury or manipulation, your presence preserves the foundations upon which the Imperium stands. Do not underestimate the weight of clarity in times of chaos." As the prelude to open conflict intensified, the Imperium had begun to diverge from the path that had led to catastrophic civil war in the canonical history. Angron's influence prevented early fractures from cascading uncontrollably. Loyalty endured where it might have faltered, and rebellion was mitigated before it could coalesce into open war. Yet even as systems were stabilized and influence preserved, the universe was not devoid of danger. Xenos incursions, rogue warlords, and internal dissent still threatened the Imperium.
Angron's strategic interventions, his clear command, and his unyielding discipline were continually tested. Every campaign, every negotiation, and every confrontation reinforced the principle that leadership must be guided by foresight and judgment rather than mere impulse. The stage was now set for decisive confrontations. Horus's ambitions would not be eliminated, nor the seeds of betrayal entirely removed, but their potency was diminished. The presence of an unbroken Angron had shifted the calculus of rebellion, stabilized wavering legions, and imposed a standard of loyalty, clarity, and disciplined action that would define the Imperium's response to the coming storm. As the fleet advanced into sectors poised on the brink of upheaval, Angron's gaze was unwavering. The Red Angel, unbroken, disciplined, and loyal, stood as both sword and shield, a fulcrum of stability in a galaxy where ambition, envy, and betrayal threatened to consume all. The Horus Heresy in this timeline would unfold differently, shaped not only by power, but by principle, clarity, and the steadfast presence of the World Eater's unbroken Primarch.
The galaxy had grown restless. Where once the Great Crusade brought liberation and unity, now shadows of rebellion festered, poised to ignite the fires of civil war. Horus's subtle manipulations had begun to coalesce into open dissent among certain legions, and whispers of discontent had transformed into bold assertions of autonomy. Yet even as the Imperium teetered on the edge of the Horus Heresy, Angron and his unbroken World Eaters stood as a fulcrum of clarity, loyalty, and disciplined might. It began with skirmishes along contested systems at the fringe of Imperial space. Rogue fleets, swayed by Horus's promises and subtle coercion, tested Imperial authority. Where history had recorded uncontrolled violence and fractured responses, this timeline revealed a starkly different pattern. Angron's presence was decisive. The World Eaters engaged with unmatched coordination, neutralizing threats with precision while preserving civilian populations and critical infrastructure. Each campaign demonstrated the synthesis of martial prowess and disciplined judgment, a paradigm foreign to those who expected the Legion to descend into mindless fury. Reports from other Primarchs arrived rapidly, describing not only tactical success, but the unexpected stability Angron brought to systems under threat. Guilliman, analyzing operational reports, noted the coherence of the World Eater's actions. Ferrus Manus commended the precision of logistics and the resilience of command structures. Even Sanguinius, who had long felt the weight of destiny in delicate moral balance, observed the contrast between the canonical pattern of Angron's rage and the deliberate, disciplined response of the unbroken Primarch. The first major confrontation with Horus's forces arose when a faction of the Luna Wolves attempted to seize control of a critical star system under Imperial governance. Horus himself had not yet revealed the full scope of his rebellion, but his influence was evident. The system's defenders, primed by whispers of discontent, were vulnerable to manipulation. Angron's fleet intercepted the rebels with a combination of overwhelming force, coordinated maneuvers, and targeted diplomacy. The result was swift, decisive, and surprisingly bloodless. Key leaders were captured and convinced to reaffirm loyalty through reasoned dialogue, their grievances addressed through measured reforms rather than coercion. Horus, observing from a distance, felt the first real obstruction to his designs. Angron's unflinching loyalty, tempered with judgment, was a force he could neither intimidate nor manipulate. Where other Primarchs might have been swayed by subtle persuasion or threats, Angron applied principle as armor and clarity as a blade.
Each action reinforced cohesion among the World Eaters, while simultaneously countering the expansion of Horus's influence. Confrontations with other Primarchs became increasingly delicate. Lorgar, whose ideological temptations had fueled canonical shifts toward rebellion, attempted to sway elements of Angron's forces through subtle propaganda, appeals to destiny, and manipulation of perception. Yet Angron's vigilance, grounded in experience and insight, neutralized these attempts. Lorgar found that reasoned dialogue, exposure of manipulations, and reinforcement of loyalty created a force resistant to ideological corruption. The World Eater's cohesion became a model that both inspired and restrained, preventing the seeds of rebellion from taking root within the Imperium's ranks.
Even Fulgrim, who delighted in the subtle exercise of influence and aesthetic perfection, encountered limits when attempting to manipulate the World Eaters. Where canonical history had placed Angron as a pawn to chaos through his rage, this unbroken Angron demonstrated that discipline and judgment could counteract even the most seductive temptations. Fulgrim's attempts to provoke ego-driven conflict were met with measured analysis and the unyielding application of principle. The Red Angel's presence became a mirror, reflecting ambition but refusing to be bent by it. Battles escalated. The unbroken World Eaters engaged in both fleet actions and planetary campaigns, each operation executed with strategic foresight and moral clarity. Rogue forces, expecting mindless brutality, were confronted with precision, tactical brilliance, and humane restraint. Planets threatened by rebellion were stabilized through coordinated action that neutralized threats, reinforced loyalty, and preserved essential infrastructure. Civilians and soldiers alike recognized the distinction. These were not warriors defined by fury, but by purpose, cohesion, and reasoned strength. Horus's rebellion began to meet real resistance, not only in battle, but in the hearts and minds of those who wavered between loyalty and ambition. Angron's interventions disrupted the momentum of the traitorous forces, delaying coordinated assaults and exposing weaknesses in conspiratorial plans. Where history had recorded decisive victories for Horus's faction early in the Heresy, this alternate timeline revealed a much slower, more contested escalation. The presence of an unbroken Angron had imposed a counterweight, a stabilizing force rooted in loyalty, clarity, and the disciplined application of power. Direct confrontation with Horus's forces intensified when a strategically vital system, rich in resources and political influence, became the focal point of both rebellion and loyalty. Horus's fleet engaged Imperial defenders, intending to force a decisive early advantage. Angron commanded the World Eaters with surgical precision. Boarding actions were targeted, sabotage neutralized preemptively, and enemy morale undermined not by terror, but through demonstration of disciplined superiority and clear purpose. Rebel forces surrendered, not out of fear alone, but because loyalty to principle and the Emperor outweighed the seductive allure of Horus's promises. Even among the Primarchs who had previously considered siding with Horus, the example of Angron's unyielding discipline created hesitation. Fulgrim's attempts to incite dissent, Lorgar's appeals to destiny, and even Magnus's subtle ideological sway were tempered by the presence of a Primarch who exemplified loyalty and clarity. Decisions once thought inevitable now faced genuine obstacles. The Red Angel's influence was reshaping the political and moral calculus of rebellion, slowing the cascade of events that had led to catastrophic civil war in canonical history. The Emperor, observing these developments, understood the magnitude of what had been altered. "The flame of betrayal still burns," he reflected in a rare private audience with Angron, "but its spread is constrained by clarity and principle." You have demonstrated that loyalty, reason, and discipline can redirect the currents of ambition that threaten to engulf the Imperium. Stand firm, Angron. The galaxy watches your example." Angron's reply was measured but resolute. "I will not allow the Imperium to be defined by rage, deceit, or ambition unchecked. My legion and I will act with purpose, with judgment, and with loyalty. The course of rebellion will be shaped, not by fury, but by clarity." As the conflict escalated, the World Eaters' reputation solidified across the Imperium. Their campaigns became exemplars of discipline, loyalty, and effectiveness. Systems liberated or defended by their presence remained stable. Legions tempted by rebellion hesitated in the face of a force guided not by wrath, but by principle. The trajectory of the Heresy, once thought inevitable, was being rewritten, the galaxy itself shifting beneath the influence of a Primarch who had remained unbroken. In the darkness between stars, the Red Angel stood aboard his flagship, overseeing fleets arrayed in perfect coordination. The tide of rebellion surged, yet where canonical history recorded chaos, this timeline revealed the stabilizing hand of clarity. Loyalty endured, principle guided action, and strength was tempered with judgment. The Imperium had changed, and the presence of an unbroken Angron ensured that when the fires of the Horus Heresy fully ignited, the galaxy would face a conflict defined not by inevitable devastation, but by a new balance of power, principle, and loyalty.
The galaxy had descended into a maelstrom of violence, ideology, and betrayal. Systems once unified under the Emperor's banner now trembled beneath the weight of rebellion. Horus, having revealed his ambitions openly, led a coalition of Primarchs and legions in a sweeping bid to seize the Imperium's heart. Yet even as the heresy reached its apex, the presence of an unbroken Angron shifted the calculus of war, altering battles, alliances, and the very course of history. From the command deck of his flagship, Angron observed the unfolding chaos with clarity. His legion, disciplined, cohesive, and unwavering, had become a stabilizing force across contested sectors. Unlike canonical accounts, where the World Eaters were consumed by rage, these warriors acted with precision, executing strategies designed not merely to destroy, but to preserve, protect, and uphold loyalty. Each campaign strengthened the bonds between soldier and Primarch, demonstrating that loyalty could coexist with might, and discipline with fury restrained by judgment. The first major clash occurred near a strategically vital cluster of systems, where Horus sought to consolidate resources for his assault on Terra. Rogue Imperial fleets, having shifted allegiance under subtle influence, engaged loyalist forces. Angron coordinated a multi-front defense, employing tactics honed from campaigns across the Crusade. Boarding actions were surgical. Planetary defenses were reinforced efficiently, minimizing civilian casualties while maximizing effectiveness. Even the tactics of Horus's forces, designed to provoke chaos, were countered by foresight and strategic clarity. During the engagement, a detachment of Luna Wolves attempted to flank the World Eaters' forces, intending to encircle and isolate their command. Angron anticipated this maneuver. He dispatched coordinated reinforcements to the predicted vectors, cutting off enemy advances while maintaining the integrity of civilian structures and loyalist units. The engagement concluded with minimal loss to civilian populations and maximal preservation of loyalist strength, a stark contrast to the indiscriminate slaughter that history had recorded. Other Primarchs watched, their reactions revealing the significance of Angron's altered trajectory. Guilliman analyzed the operational brilliance, recognizing that the Red Angel had not only neutralized threats, but done so in a way that reinforced stability. Sanguinius observed the restraint displayed, noting that discipline tempered by principle could achieve results that brute fury never could. Even Fulgrim and Lorgar, whose influence had tempted rebellion, hesitated, aware that their subtle manipulations would be countered by foresight, judgment, and unwavering loyalty. As the battle spread across star systems, Angron's interventions created a ripple effect. Legions that had wavered in loyalty were reassured by example and strategic influence. Systems destabilized by propaganda or ambition regained order through the world leader's disciplined presence. The galaxy, while still engulfed in conflict, no longer faced inevitable collapse. The seeds of rebellion, though present, struggled to flourish in the face of reasoned authority, clear judgment, and coordinated might.
The confrontation reached a critical turning point when Horus initiated his assault on a pivotal system guarding key hyperspace routes to Terra. The War Master expected rapid victories, leveraging both tactical advantage and the psychological weight of his betrayal. Angron anticipated the attack, deploying his forces in a combination of defensive arrays and counteroffensive vectors designed to contain and isolate enemy advances. Rebel forces, expecting the usual feral aggression of the World Eaters, were confronted instead with precision, coordination, and strategy informed by foresight. During the battle, Horus attempted to engage directly with Angron's command, sending envoys and messages cloaked in diplomacy, yet charged with veiled threats and persuasion. Angron responded with measured authority, acknowledging grievances but highlighting principle, loyalty, and duty as guiding forces. "Your path is forged in ambition," he stated, voice carrying across the void. "Yet strength without clarity, loyalty without principle, leads only to ruin. Your actions may rally some, but they cannot bend what is guided by reason and honor." The words were not met with submission, yet they introduced hesitation. Among Horus's allies, murmurs spread of the unwavering Red Angel, a presence that could not be intimidated, manipulated, or corrupted. Systems previously poised for defection reconsidered their alignment. Even the Luna Wolves, trained to follow Horus's lead without question, experienced fractures in loyalty under the weight of Angron's influence. The Red Angel had become both shield and mirror, reflecting ambition but resisting its corrosive effects. Elsewhere, the Emperor prepared for the inevitable confrontation on Terra. Reports from loyalist Primarchs indicated a shift in the balance of power. The presence of an unbroken Angron had delayed coordinated attacks, preserved critical infrastructure, and reinforced the loyalty of wavering legions. The Emperor understood the significance of this deviation. "Where others falter, clarity prevails," he observed in council with select commanders. "Angron's influence alters the tide. The consequences of loyalty tempered by principle will shape the outcome of this conflict." In the midst of these campaigns, Angron's interactions with other Primarchs proved decisive. He engaged in council with loyalists, guided hesitant legions, and mitigated internal disputes that could have fractured command. Even Primarchs predisposed to neutrality or opportunism were swayed by the example of discipline, cohesion, and unyielding loyalty. Where canonical history depicted fractured chains of command and uncontrolled infighting, this timeline revealed a coordinated, principled defense against the spread of Horus's rebellion. The climactic encounter loomed, a direct confrontation with Horus's flagship near the system's core. Angron, aboard his vessel, orchestrated a symphony of strategy. Squadrons moved with precision. Boarding parties struck with calculated timing. Loyalist and civilian coordination was maintained under fire. The battle was intense, yet controlled, demonstrating that warfare need not be defined solely by destruction. Even Horus's formidable forces encountered unforeseen resistance, as Angron's clarity countered chaos and principle guided each decision. Amid the engagement, subtle interventions prevented catastrophic mistakes. Civilian populations were safeguarded, infrastructure preserved, and key logistics maintained.
Rebel forces, anticipating ferocity without foresight, were outmaneuvered by the combination of discipline and insight. The World Eaters' reputation as disciplined warriors had transformed into a symbol of principled power, a stark contrast to the legend of rage and bloodshed that had once defined them.
By the end of the engagement, Horus's forces suffered significant setbacks. Systems expected to defect were retained, strategic positions were held, and the momentum of rebellion slowed. Even the War Master himself began to recognize the influence of the unbroken Red Angel, a presence capable of altering outcomes, guiding loyalty, and tempering ambition without yielding an inch in authority or principle. As the stars themselves bore witness to the unfolding heresy, one truth became evident. The galaxy, once destined for near total devastation, was now on a divergent path. Angron's unbroken will had preserved order, shaped loyalty, and altered the trajectory of conflict. The Red Angel had become a fulcrum upon which the fate of the Imperium teetered, a beacon of clarity in the heart of rebellion, whose presence would ensure that the fires of war were fought not only with strength, but with purpose.
The final approach to Terra was marked by a tension that stretched across the void of space like an electric current. Star systems that had been the stage for campaigns, rebellions, and interventions now fell silent, their populations and defenses poised for the decisive clash of the Horus Heresy. Horus, emboldened by his coalition and convinced of the inevitability of the Emperor's downfall, advanced with overwhelming force. Yet the galaxy had shifted. The presence of an unbroken Angron altered the scale and scope of what was to come. From his flagship, Angron observed the oncoming storm. The Red Angel had become a symbol of loyalty, clarity, and disciplined might. His legion, tempered by foresight and cohesion, was prepared not only for battle, but for the strategic interventions that would determine the fate of the Imperium. Where canonical history had placed the World Eaters as a force consumed by rage, this legion now embodied principle and judgment, projecting a power that was both lethal and stabilizing. The first phase of engagement involved the outer orbital defenses of Terra. Horus's fleet, vast and meticulously coordinated, sought to isolate the planet from reinforcements and destabilize the Imperial defenders. Angron deployed the World Eaters in a series of staggered formations, each precisely calculated to counter the numerical advantage of the traitors. Boarding parties, tactical strikes, and defensive orbital arrays executed in perfect harmony, preserving infrastructure and civilian populations while neutralizing key threats. Every maneuver reflected the synthesis of martial prowess and unyielding discipline. The Emperor, observing from the Golden Throne, noted the extraordinary impact of his son's presence. "The flames of rebellion will not consume all," he murmured to himself. "Angron tempers fury with judgment. He preserves what must endure." The Emperor's plans, once reliant on the inevitable loss of Angron to rage and despair, now had a fulcrum of clarity on which to pivot. The outcome of the confrontation was no longer predetermined. The unbroken Red Angel had rewritten the calculus. Horus, sensing resistance that exceeded expectations, attempted a direct intervention. His flagship maneuvered to engage key World Eater vessels, intending to disrupt coordination and fracture the Loyalist lines. Yet Angron anticipated such a move, orchestrated countermeasures with impeccable foresight. Detachments were redeployed to predicted vectors, enemy boarding attempts were intercepted, and morale among the Loyalist forces held firm under the steady guidance of the Red Angel. The chaos Horus had expected
was neutralized before it could manifest. The confrontation reached its critical apex when the Emperor prepared to face Horus directly within the halls of Terra. The historical duel, once defined by inevitability and near catastrophic failure, now bore a different structure. Angron, recognizing the strategic and moral significance of the impending encounter, positioned his forces to secure key approaches, maintain loyalty among defenders, and provide the Emperor with the support that had been absent in canonical history. Where betrayal had once allowed Horus near victory, the Emperor's path was now reinforced by a fulcrum of unwavering clarity. As Horus boarded the imperial palace, the tension was palpable. Loyalist forces, coordinated by Angron's guidance, engaged traitor units with a combination of force and strategy designed to prevent the collapse of command. Each engagement demonstrated the World Eater's transformed identity, lethal, precise, and principled. Civilian populations and imperial administrators were protected, and chaos that might have allowed Horus's personal forces to advance unchecked was mitigated by foresight and disciplined deployment. The Emperor and Horus met in the throne chamber, the culmination of decades of ambition, loyalty, and conflict. Yet the presence of Angron in the surrounding corridors and command networks altered the dynamics of the confrontation. Messages flowed efficiently, reinforcements were coordinated with unmatched timing, and the Emperor's forces maintained cohesion despite the proximity of treachery. Horus's maneuvers, calculated to exploit weakness and fear, were countered by clarity, principle, and disciplined loyalty projected through Angron's strategic oversight. The duel itself, while fierce, unfolded differently. Where canonical history had allowed Horus moments of advantage, the Emperor's defense was supported by precise interventions and loyal contingents who remained coordinated and focused under Angron's influence. The Red Angel's presence ensured that every breach of defense was met with rapid and disciplined response, denying Horus the leverage he had expected. The Emperor's wrath, long tempered by foresight and strategy, was amplified by the loyal and principled execution of his forces. Horus's defeat, once precarious and near fatal for the Imperium, was now decisive. The combination of the Emperor's might and Angron's unyielding support ensured that the War Master's rebellion collapsed swiftly after the duel. Legions swayed by ambition or doubt were restored to loyalty through example, counsel, and principled guidance. The heresy, though destructive, did not unravel the fabric of the Imperium as it had in canonical history. Systems recovered, populations were protected, and fractured alliances were repaired under the stabilizing influence of the unbroken Red Angel. In the aftermath, Angron oversaw the stabilization of the Imperium's command structure. Traitor legions were disbanded, reconciled, or contained with minimal bloodshed. Civilian infrastructure was restored, political cohesion reinforced, and the galaxy, though scarred by war, had not fallen into the abyss of devastation. The Emperor, observing the outcomes, acknowledged the singular impact of Angron's presence. "You have altered the course of history," he said. "Where rage once threatened to destroy, your clarity preserved. The Imperium endures because of judgment guided by loyalty." The World Eater's legacy was forever transformed. No longer defined solely by fury, bloodlust, and uncontrolled aggression, the Legion emerged as a symbol of disciplined might, principled loyalty, and strategic clarity. Systems liberated or defended by their hand remembered not only their strength, but the guidance and restraint that prevented catastrophe. Angron's example reshaped perceptions across the Imperium, demonstrating that rage could be tempered, loyalty could be inspired, and power could be wielded with purpose rather than destruction. As the stars bore witness to the conclusion of the heresy, the galaxy recognized a new trajectory. The Emperor, restored to full authority, prepared to guide the Imperium into the next era with the stabilizing presence of his sons, particularly the unbroken Red Angel. The tides of rebellion, ambition, and chaos had been reshaped, constrained by clarity, discipline, and principle. The galaxy would remember Angron not as a tool of fury, but as a fulcrum of loyalty, judgment, and unwavering purpose, a Primarch who had altered the destiny of the Imperium itself. In the silent void beyond Terra, the Red Angel stood aboard his flagship, gazing into the stars. The Great Crusade had reached its culmination. The Emperor's heresy had been tempered, and the Imperium endured. Strength and loyalty, tempered by clarity, had prevailed. And the galaxy, though scarred, had been granted a future not defined by inevitable destruction, but by principle, cohesion, and the indomitable will of a Primarch who had remained unbroken.
The fires of the Horus Heresy had been quenched, but the scars it left upon the Imperium were deep and lasting. Star systems bore the mark of conflict, populations mourned the lost, and the political structures of the Imperium demanded restoration. Yet, in this altered timeline, the devastation was tempered by the presence of an unbroken Angron, whose influence had shaped battles, loyalty, and decisions from the onset of rebellion to its climactic resolution. From Terra, the Emperor observed the reconstruction with measured satisfaction. The most critical difference between this reality and the canonical history was clear. The Imperium, though tested, had not collapsed. Systems once threatened by rebellion remained loyal. Infrastructure survived where it might have been destroyed. And legions that had been poised to fracture were guided back into the fold. At the heart of this stabilization stood the World Eaters, no longer defined by unrestrained fury, but by discipline, cohesion, and principle. Angron's role in this era of reconstruction was pivotal. He coordinated the restoration of contested sectors, overseeing the reestablishment of local governance, military security, and logistical networks. His guidance emphasized balance, strength applied decisively, loyalty preserved through principle, and order restored without unnecessary destruction. Planetary governors, administrators, and military officers were held accountable but also supported, ensuring that the Imperium's recovery was guided not by fear, but by clarity and structured authority. The world leaders themselves underwent transformation. Their campaigns had demonstrated that martial excellence, when tempered by judgment, could achieve outcomes previously thought impossible. Soldiers trained under Angron's supervision learned discipline, restraint, and strategic thinking alongside combat prowess. The Legion became a model of effective military organization, ferocious in battle, yet principled in application. Their reputation spread throughout the Imperium, inspiring both awe and emulation among other legions and planetary forces. Primarch interactions were reshaped in this period. Loyalist legions, witnessing Angron's effectiveness and judgment, sought counsel and guidance. Guilliman, impressed by the operational excellence of the World Eaters, began consultations on doctrine reform, logistics, and command structure. Sanguinius observed Angron's moral clarity and began integrating lessons of restraint and guidance into his own leadership. Even those Primarchs who had previously wavered during the rebellion recognized the stabilizing influence of the Red Angel, acknowledging that disciplined principle could prevent the recurrence of catastrophic civil strife.
One of Angron's first major initiatives involved the reintegration of legions that had been influenced by Horus, but not irredeemably corrupted. Rather than treating them as irredeemable traitors, he implemented a system of accountability, training, and guided oversight. Units that demonstrated willingness to reconcile were reassigned to strategic sectors, their loyalty tested but not presumed lost. This approach prevented the creation of lingering resentment and further rebellion, stabilizing regions that in canonical history had remained contested for decades.
The Emperor, observing these initiatives, provided counsel but deferred authority to Angron in many operational matters. "You have not only prevented the collapse of order," he remarked, "but you have demonstrated that clarity, loyalty, and discipline can shape the Imperium more effectively than brute force alone. The galaxy owes much to your presence." Angron accepted the praise with solemnity, aware that the responsibility of influence was a burden heavier than any weapon he had ever wielded. Political reform extended beyond military matters. Systems devastated by rebellion required administrative restoration, legal frameworks, and moral guidance. Angron coordinated with planetary governors and administrators, emphasizing the principles that had guided him throughout the Crusade and the Heresy: accountability, clarity, loyalty, and principle. Decisions were made not solely through coercion, but through negotiation, guidance, and the careful application of authority. The Imperium, in this timeline, began to exhibit resilience that surpassed its canonical counterpart. In addition, Angron oversaw the creation of permanent liaison structures between legions, planetary governors, and the imperial bureaucracy. These networks facilitated communication, conflict resolution, and strategic planning, reducing the likelihood that dissent or miscommunication could escalate into rebellion. The Red Angel's foresight had transformed not only battle outcomes, but the very structures that governed the Imperium, ensuring that loyalty and principle were embedded in organizational frameworks. Beyond administrative and military concerns, Angron also influenced moral philosophy across the Imperium. By example and direct counsel, he demonstrated that rage could be tempered, fury could serve purpose, and loyalty was not mere obedience, but a reflection of principle and understanding. Soldiers, leaders, and civilians internalized this philosophy, creating a cultural shift that emphasized the responsible application of power. The World Eater's transformation from a legion of fury into a model of disciplined authority was complete, and their legacy became a cornerstone of the Imperium's renewal. The galaxy, while scarred by decades of conflict, began to heal. Critical systems were rebuilt, economic and logistical networks restored, and the infrastructure of governance reinforced. Angron's interventions ensured that the cycle of rebellion and revenge, which had plagued canonical history, was broken. Where fear, ambition, and chaos had once dictated outcomes, clarity, loyalty, and disciplined judgment now guided reconstruction. Even threats from beyond the Imperium, Xenos incursions, rogue warlords, and remnants of chaos forces, were addressed more efficiently. Angron's strategic oversight enabled rapid mobilization, coordinated defense, and precise engagement. Civilian populations were protected not only from internal instability, but from external threats, reinforcing the Imperium's resilience. The Red Angel's influence extended beyond the battlefield, shaping a galaxy that would endure challenges with foresight and principle. Yet even in this era of reconstruction, challenges remained. The lingering scars of war demanded vigilance, and the potential for future rebellion required constant reinforcement of loyalty and principle. Angron, ever vigilant, understood that his role was not simply to command, but to model the application of authority guided by judgment. His presence ensured that the Imperium would not only survive, but emerge stronger, wiser, and more cohesive than it had in canonical history.
Decades passed since the decisive conclusion of the Horus Heresy. The galaxy, once teetering on the brink of annihilation, had begun to stabilize under the combined leadership of the Emperor, the loyalist Primarchs, and, most notably, Angron. His presence, unbroken and resolute, had shifted the very fabric of the Imperium, shaping its institutions, military doctrines, and cultural ethos in ways that would endure for centuries. Where history had once recorded endless cycles of rebellion, the Imperium now experienced unprecedented cohesion. Angron's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. He oversaw the restructuring of the Adeptus Astartes, ensuring that every legion incorporated principles of discipline, judgment, and loyalty alongside martial excellence. Training regimens emphasized strategy, coordination, and ethical engagement with civilian populations. Soldiers were no longer merely instruments of war. They became exemplars of principle, wielded with precision. The World Eaters themselves became legendary, not for indiscriminate fury, but for unmatched operational excellence. Across the Imperium, their campaigns were studied as models of how strength could be tempered with clarity. Planetary governors, administrative councils, and military commanders learned from the Legion's methods, incorporating similar principles into governance and defense. Angron's name became synonymous with loyalty, discipline, and principled authority. His influence immortalized in doctrines, training manuals, and the cultural memory of the Imperium. Political structures, too, were transformed. Systems that had once been vulnerable to sedition were reinforced by councils and liaison networks designed to maintain transparency, communication, and oversight. Angron's philosophy that loyalty must be earned, principle must guide authority, and clarity must temper strength was embedded into governance, ensuring that ambition or manipulation could not destabilize the Imperium as it had during the Heresy. Governors and planetary administrators internalized these ideals, reducing the likelihood of systemic corruption or rebellion. Even the Emperor, observing these developments, recognized the unparalleled impact of his son. Angron has done what even I could not fully achieve alone, he reflected during private council with select Primarchs. Where others relied on obedience or fear, he has demonstrated that loyalty rooted in principle and clarity can stabilize a galaxy. His influence will endure far beyond my reign. Angron, ever solemn, accepted this recognition not as praise, but as a reminder of the immense responsibility his presence entailed. Across the Imperium, cultural shifts emerged as well. Civilians and soldiers alike came to value the principles exemplified by the World Eaters: clarity in decision-making, loyalty balanced by judgment, and the disciplined application of power. The mythos surrounding the Red Angel emphasized restraint, honor, and the importance of principle-guided strength. Where once tales of uncontrolled rage defined the Legion, now stories celebrated their strategic brilliance, moral integrity, and capacity for restraint in the face of provocation. The galaxy's external threats, too, were mitigated more effectively. Xenos incursions that might have spiraled into prolonged wars were contained with coordinated campaigns executed with minimal collateral damage. Rogue warlords and remnants of chaos forces were neutralized through a combination of decisive engagement and strategic foresight. Angron's doctrine, emphasizing principle as much as strength, allowed the Imperium to confront these challenges without descending into the cycle of indiscriminate slaughter that had characterized prior eras. Primarch relations, historically strained and often marred by mistrust, now reflected a more cooperative model. Angron's example fostered dialogue, mutual respect, and coordinated leadership. Conflicts between legions were resolved through council and strategic negotiation rather than open hostilities. Sanguinius, Guilliman, and other loyalist Primarchs recognized the enduring value of his influence, integrating his methods into broader military and administrative frameworks. Where canonical history had recorded rivalry, jealousy, and fragmentation, this timeline revealed cohesion, shared purpose, and disciplined collaboration. The Emperor, in turn, leveraged Angron's stabilized leadership to focus on the Imperium's long-term vision. with a son capable of guiding armies, preserving loyalty, and stabilizing political systems, the Golden Throne's psychic presence could be directed toward strategic oversight rather than constant crisis management. The Imperium, though scarred, entered a phase of consolidation, growth, and measured expansion, guided by the principles that Angron had championed during the Heresy and its aftermath. Even the ideological landscape of the Imperium shifted. Where canonical history had left humanity vulnerable to the corrosive influence of chaos, the stabilized and principled Imperium developed cultural and religious frameworks that emphasized accountability, clarity, and loyalty to principle rather than blind obedience. Temples, academies, and administrative institutions taught that power must be wielded responsibly, that authority must be justified, and that strength without judgment leads to ruin. The example of Angron and the World Eaters became a foundational component of this evolving ethos. Centuries later, the galaxy remembered the Heresy not only as a conflict of ambition and betrayal, but as a turning point shaped decisively by the presence of the Red Angel. Scholars, tacticians, and historians noted that the intervention of an unbroken Angron had prevented systemic collapse, preserved critical infrastructure, and ensured that the Imperium emerged stronger, wiser, and more cohesive than it otherwise could have. The World Eaters' reputation as a disciplined, principled force endured, redefining their legacy and inspiring generations of soldiers across countless systems. Even within the ranks of the Astartes, tales of Angron's deeds were recounted not as cautionary stories of uncontrolled rage, but as exemplars of loyalty, clarity, and the disciplined application of strength. The legion's transformation became a benchmark for other legions, demonstrating that ferocity and judgment could coexist in a single, harmonious model of power. The galaxy, once poised for destruction under the canonical trajectory of the Heresy, had been reshaped. Systems were stronger, alliances more durable, and loyalty fortified by principle. The Emperor, while ever vigilant, could finally see a future in which the Imperium endured not merely by brute force or fear, but by the enduring influence of reasoned authority. And at the center of this transformation stood Angron, the unbroken Red Angel, a fulcrum of clarity, a guardian of loyalty, and the unyielding force that had forged a new era for humanity among the stars.
The echoes of the Horus Heresy had long faded from the void, yet their memory endured as a testament to ambition, loyalty, and the choices of a few who could alter the fate of the galaxy. Centuries had passed since the fires of rebellion were quenched, and the Imperium, scarred but unbroken, stood stronger, more cohesive, and more resilient than ever. At the heart of this enduring stability remained a figure both feared and revered. Angron, the Red Angel, unbroken and tempered by principle. No longer a symbol of uncontrolled fury, he had become the embodiment of disciplined strength, clarity, and unwavering loyalty. His legion, the World Eaters, served not only as warriors, but as exemplars of leadership, strategic brilliance, and moral restraint. Across the stars, their campaigns and guidance had reshaped the very nature of the Imperium, forging an era where power was wielded with purpose, and loyalty was guided by principle rather than fear. The Emperor's vision, once imperiled by the Heresy, had been preserved and strengthened. Terra thrived as the political and spiritual heart of humanity, supported by legions and systems aligned not through intimidation, but through the example of reasoned authority and disciplined might. Primarchs who had once wavered in ambition now collaborated with purpose, recognizing that clarity and principle could prevent the cycles of betrayal that had nearly destroyed the galaxy. The legacy of the unbroken Angron extended beyond military conquest. Administrators, governors, and citizens absorbed the lessons of his leadership.
that strength untempered by judgment leads to ruin, that loyalty guided by principle endures, and that the chaos of ambition can be countered by clarity of purpose. Systems once torn by rebellion now thrived under governance informed by his example, and the Imperium emerged as a civilization more resilient than its founders could have imagined. Yet even as centuries passed, the Red Angel's influence remained vigilant. His presence aboard the flagship that bore his name became a symbol of hope, discipline, and the enduring power of loyalty. Tales of battles, campaigns, and strategic brilliance spread across the Imperium, inspiring new generations of warriors, leaders, and citizens alike. The World Eater's transformation became a benchmark for what a legion could achieve when fury was tempered by judgment, when strength was aligned with purpose, and when loyalty was forged through clarity rather than coercion. The galaxy, while still vast and fraught with dangers, Xeno's threats, rogue warlords, and the lingering whispers of chaos, had entered a new era, one defined not solely by survival or fear, but by principle, cohesion, and the enduring guidance of those who chose to act with clarity. Angron, the Red Angel, had altered the course of history, ensuring that humanity would endure not as a fractured relic of ambition, but as a civilization strengthened by discipline, foresight, and unwavering loyalty. And so, the Imperium looked to the stars with renewed purpose. The Heresy had been a crucible, a trial that tested the limits of loyalty, ambition, and strength. But from its fires emerged a galaxy reforged, tempered, unified, and guided by the hand of a Primarch who had never yielded to rage. The legacy of Angron endured, a beacon of disciplined might and principled leadership that would shape humanity's destiny for millennia to come. In the silence between stars, the Red Angel stood watch, ever vigilant, a sentinel of clarity in an ever-changing galaxy. And in that presence, the Imperium, for the first time in its long history, knew that its survival, its strength, and its future were secured by loyalty tempered with principle, and by the unbroken will of a Primarch who had reshaped the fate of all mankind.